Hello all, Rick here. The final episode of Strange New Worlds Season 1 tackled the overhanging question of why does Pike not attempt to alter his future, now that he knows his fate. And I have to say the changes that would have been wrought onto the timeline from how he attempted to handle things were great to see unfold in that episode, set in the year 2266, during the events of Balance of Terror, but in an altered what-if timeline. So let's discuss those changes, because for the most part, I think they hold up as believable outcomes. There are some things that can also be chalked up to the fact that 7 years of difference have passed between Pike choosing to alter his fate and the encounter with the Romulans, and there are a lot of minor things that could build up in that time. To begin with, the initial repercussion is that there are now going to be more cadets alive that make it through the incident that condemns Pike, but there is a far greater change that takes place. In effect, it seems that Pike does not accept promotion to fleet captain, or if he does, he chooses to remain aboard the USS Enterprise. Whether this change is motivated to further avoid the accident in his future, or a repercussion of some other alteration, he remains in the centre chair of the iconic vessel long after he should have stepped away before handing over command to Kirk. There is also the possibility that his tour as fleet captain was only ever to be temporary, and he was slated to return to the Enterprise upon its conclusion. This has a major knock-on effect, for now, with a different captain, the following missions unfold in an entirely different fashion, and it has me wondering how this alternate Pike would have dealt with the other missions the original series covered. We see that Una Chin-Riley is still removed from the vessel, allowing for the executive officer position to fall to Spock, so that remains the same. And Uhura continues to serve aboard the Enterprise too, after all, why would she not? We also learn that since the departure of Hemmer, the Enterprise now has a chief engineer of Scottish descent, but they are not named, only heard. Chapel potentially remains on board, but so does Joseph Mbenga as the chief medical officer, meaning that the place was never open for Leonard McCoy to assume, despite the fact that Mbenga does remain aboard the Enterprise as part of McCoy's team in the Prime reality. Alongside this, many of Pike's familiar crewmen remain, although La'an seems to have accepted a transfer to the USS Farragut as a commander. To me, this makes sense for the environment that Captain Pike likes to foster among his senior staff, so it's only natural that many would want to remain on the Enterprise as part of his command. The biggest issue is brought forth when it is highlighted that Captain James Kirk cannot be in command of the Enterprise if Pike remained. The Enterprise was already an iconic vessel in the fleet, and a poster for what Starfleet could achieve and strive for. When Kirk assumes command, the youngest officer to make captain in Starfleet history, the achievements of that ship mounted. While Kirk still has an incredible career path laid out for him in this alteration, he's not where he needs to be. In this instance, it seems that Kirk remained aboard the USS Farragut, a posting he had originally under Captain Garovic. It seems that in this alteration he returned to the ship as its new command officer, and therefore was surrounded by an entirely different crew, the most notable of which is that he never befriends Commander Spock. Deprived of this friendship and influence, both their lives are already going to diverge significantly, but for Spock it seems things only get worse. In another change, however, a more light-hearted one, it seems that George Samuel Kirk remains aboard the Enterprise, seeing as his brother is not the commanding officer, I guess, instead of taking an assignment a year earlier on Deneva in 2265. This means that he was never there for the flying neural parasite outbreak that claimed his life, so at least the two brothers get to have more time together. Pike's attempt to make peace with the Romulan Star Empire in 2266 gives the enemy ships a chance to call in reinforcements, and the situation escalates. This paints Balance of Terror as an even more pivotal encounter in the original series, as it adds the notion that the Romulans were literally preparing to invade, with the Bird of Prey being a stealthy vanguard to test the Federation's responses. The Star Empire is a very propaganda-driven power, built on mistrust of others and even their own, so although the Romulan commander proved amiable to discussion and reason, there are many within who were not, and the Star Empire would not be open to negotiations in earnest till at least 2379, and that was thanks in part to the efforts of Ambassador Spock. Spock ends up either dead or permanently incapacitated from this altercation, which means that he is effectively removed from the timeline going forwards too. With no Spock, the Vija crisis could have unfolded differently. Who knows what would have even happened with the whale probe, and beyond that, the political landscape of the Federation would be so wildly different, thanks to Starfleet's second war with the Romulans, that further speculation is pointless. Probably no Khitomer Accords for a start. Pike, however, remains alive into what appears to be at least the 2280s, judging by the uniform, which too was slightly affected by the timeline changes. He appears stating that the war with the Star Empire has continued since 2266, and that he had returned to the Klingon monks of Boreth to correct his unforeseen alterations of time. In the future, where Pike lives on a healthy life, he becomes aware of the path Spock was supposed to walk, eventually becoming an ambassador to Romulus and sowing the seeds for his unification movement in his later years. Without Spock's gradual diplomatic efforts, the Star Empire remained an adversary, presumably right into the 24th century, instead of withdrawing back behind the neutral zone for almost a century. Pike goes on to learn that his alterations, no matter how well-intentioned, cannot risk upsetting the path of Spock, let alone the future he would create, and opts to undo his attempts to avoid his fate. However, it seems there are some lingering thoughts from his experience. The first is that he gets to have an in-depth chat with Captain Kirk in 2266, which then informs his decision to learn more about the man in 2259, maybe evaluating him as a replacement. Spock also senses the decision in Pike to accept his fate, and this deepens the respect he has for the man, and the lengths he will go to in the future to save Pike and return him to Talos 4. These changes address why Pike would avoid trying to alter his fate. Of course, there is always the temporal prime directive and the knowledge that you just should not attempt to change time, but when it's your own future, I think we all would try. Being confronted with the outcome turns his accident into a willful sacrifice, and as harsh as it sounds, frees up the chair for another legend, and sets up Spock for the role he needs to undertake in the future. As sad as it is, Pike needs to eventually go, but he still has a lot of work and good he can do before he does. What do you think of this? I think it leaves little doubt as to the fate of Pike now, and actually adds to the previous TOS episodes. Overall, Strange New Worlds has been pretty fantastic, which, I'll be honest, allows me to gloss over a lot more of the discrepancies, and I look forward to more tales in this series. Thanks for watching, and I'll check out your comments as we go. Until then, goodbye.